Michael McKibben here. Douglas?
Well, thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Michael. We're going to get back on this topic that yesterday got me so upset. Matter of fact, I think I was probably just carrying on because you have discovered something that I, as a historian, literally with a degree in British history, for heaven's sakes, did not know that the British.
Hey, Douglas.
Yeah.
One of your trolling critics says there's no such thing as a degree in British history.
I have a degree in history with a focus in British history.
Okay. Same.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sorry. There's all kinds of distinctions. So isn't that nice that people are listening and they want to correct us because we want to be accurate? That's true. So anyway, going back to what you discovered, which is shocking because as I was saying it yesterday, it was the first time I've ever said it, thinking about the history of Britain. And what do we have here? We have the incubation center for communism, Marxism, Stalinism, Leninism, capitalism, imperialism, and then the myth of the
social democracy
and
social
democracy.
Democrats.
Yes, and also then the Venetian system of banking. So that's you have banking isms, and Montague, according to Montague, of course, wanted to create a one universal coin. Why? Because he wanted, through Britain, like all good imperialists, to control everything through a centralized government, hiding behind, in this case, a monarchy in the Privy Council. So you can tell us that literally we had the leaders of Bolshevism and Russian communism being trained essentially in Britain, printing their dissident and their ridiculous documents, which are all created isms, Marxism, communism, Bolshevism. And my point yesterday was there's no such thing as an ism. There's an insane person leading a false ideology, perhaps, but in fact, there's never been a pure communism or a pure Marxism or a pure fascism or socialism. Hasn't been any such things. And all of them that have attempted have all ended up in dictatorship and totalitarianism. So I want to thank you for bringing to my attention the fact that these people, these evil plutocrats who come up with ideologies were incubated in Britain. They percolated up as the imperialistic answer to controlling the masses and giving the real control to the elite. So thank you for that research. Tell us a little bit about what you found in terms and repeat some of the things that you've said to me about who was there and when. And once you see that, that's no longer circumstantial.
Yeah. We've been processing a lot of documents and evidence from the 1900, 1905, 1906 timeframe. Well, actually, going up to 1917. And it is becoming disgustingly clear that all of these things that all of these movements that you said, you just repeated, had their genesis in the UK, Fleet Street. And I guess the thing that's becoming obvious to us anyway is that the media, the newspapers, and later radio and TV created all these false flags, what we call false flags, created all these false wars. We're talking the even Bloody Sunday, which if you study the history of Bolshevism, is pointed to as one of the precursors to the Bolshevik Revolution, were all created in the newspapers of the UK, of Britain. Were actually created, fabricated. These stories were fabricated on the pages of the British papers. And I can't tell you, as somebody who lived there and really has many friends in Britain, and believed all these stories, to realize that they're all lies. They're all fabrications to push this agenda to create a new world order. It's just shocking to me.
It is, and you're sounding depressed, but let's remember that in America, it's basically 6 companies that own all the media, and we just simply need to prosecute them for racketeering. And we can see through this genesis of the fact that the banksters control public opinion through the media. So the first thing they do is get control of the media. And in the Soros 7 steps of color revolutions, one of the first steps is control the media. And how do you control the media? Well, you create groups that have really nice sounding titles like Truth in Media. And you act like you're a 501c3 and you're helping everybody, but in fact, you're a partisan group that is trying to simply lie and fabricate, as you said. So this is what they do. This has constantly been going on. And what was so amazing to me was I started thinking, well, then really, literally, quite literally, Giuseppe Mazzini, the Italian fascist, literally, as we have said in our intelligence reports, came to Britain and taught them how the banksters could control everything through a central group. And then we have Cecil Rhodes doing that. And it's always one person in the middle, totally in charge, life and death of everybody else involved in it. Everything's secret. Nothing's written down. These are the Chatham House rules. And they brought this into institution. They institutionalized this. They made it standard operating procedure. And basically, what does it say? It's the old Jesuit system. It's the old Vatican system. It's the banker system of Italy that drifted over, and we've discussed this, but it literally was Giuseppe Mazzini, who was one of the greatest fascists of all times. And what was he doing? He was creating the British fascist groups. And then the fascist groups were doing basically what the imperialists were doing. So they were reinforcing what Cecil Rhodes' imperialism was doing. And then Alfred Milner made it, it's not so much imperialism, it's for the Commonwealth. But really what we know is Cecil Rhodes in Rhodesia and in South Africa stole the diamonds, stole the gold with Rothschild-funded and backed money. And this is a fact. This isn't a conspiracy. We know that they experimented on people. We know they tried genocide. We know they had concentration camps. We know that it was ruthless. We know that Cecil Rhodes, as a representative of the British East India Company and Britain itself, fought against the Germans, fought against the Dutch, everyone that was down in Africa trying to steal the resources and assert their white privilege. And literally white supremacy is what we're talking about here, whether it be German Aryan white supremacy or whether it be English Anglophile or Anglo-American type white supremacy. But the point is, you want to talk about Hitler? Look at Cecil Rhodes. He's the British Hitler. And then you want to talk about what they did? You pointed out that when they started the Secret Service of the newspaper intelligence group that all answered to the prime minister, and it was secret, and they all knew they were spies, they set this up even in Russia and other countries so that they got their spies in from the beginning. And now you've discovered, because you were the first person to ever tell me that Alfred Milner literally went to Russia, and we know this is true, and basically said, we're not going to give you the money that the British said you can have, and we're not going to let you fight the Bolsheviks. Why? Because they percolated the Bolsheviks up through their fascism and their incubation of isms, and then giving money, basically as much money as they want, to these individuals, psychopathic individuals, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, all of them. And they were all connected to the British and British bankers and British money. And we also know American money because of the American International Corporation, which was also a major banking group behind the Bolsheviks. They also helped percolate this into and foment it into war. So this is killing, literally 200 million people have died because of the isms that were incubated there in Britain. And you have found the documents of these people bragging about it. Yeah. It's absolutely staggering what you've discovered.
It is. I mean, we can talk about it. We can identify what they did, when they did it, but the fact that they killed so many people to hundreds of millions of people. I mean, it just boggles my mind to even talk in those terms, because we're talking about a human soul. We're talking about 200 million human souls that these people have sacrificed on the altar of this megalomania. And they did it for why? For power, for greed, for their philosophies. And to realize that, for me to realize that these people who we now can identify in the pages of these newspapers in the UK, in Britain, and I mean, we have to talk about the Commonwealth, and then we have to talk about their conspiracy with American newspapers, and realize that we are, when President Trump talks about fake news, he's talking about these people, the same newspapers in the UK, in the Commonwealth, in the United States, in Canada. We're talking about newspapers that have killed 200 million people. I mean, Douglas, this is just scandalous. I mean, I don't even have the words to describe these people, but we're still seeing it.
Oh, yeah. Let's remember, Obama bombed 7 countries without declaring war and without the permission of the Congress. Not once. They gave them the money to do it, but not even specifically that, because it wasn't specified as such. It was agreements with the British and the French usually, and then he got to bomb any place he wanted, and also on the ground started all these revolutions, all the Arab Spring uprisings, and then, Benghazi and the whole thing. But people don't believe this is possible and that we may be exaggerating 200 million people. No. Let me give you a tiny example of this, okay? Hearst and Pulitzer would be proud of what the mainstream media did to cover up Susan Rice killing 4.5 million people in Africa. Now, if you say to somebody, Susan Rice killed 4.5 million people in Africa, they will say you're insane, because they believe what they heard on the news, which they never heard a single word about that. Now we know that they bombed Libya, but that was, of course, Obama. But what happened in the midsection of Africa were wars that were basically genocides promoted by Susan Rice. And for the first time ever, Obama made one person in charge of all of Africa for the State Department, and it was Susan Rice, so that she could cover up all this. And they continued to do what? Fleece Africa, exactly like Cecil Rhodes did. And Cecil Rhodes covered up his murder. Who knows that Winston Churchill was part of those concentration camps, and he is basically the continuation of Cecil Rhodes, Milner, Winston Churchill. And Winston
Churchill was a reporter down in South Africa during the Boer Wars, and he helped cover up. He helped perpetuate these false stories, and therefore promote this mass murder in the Transvaal. And then all of those men then gravitated back to London, and then essentially took over Parliament, and then were appointed to run the British War Cabinet before and during the First World War. And so we're looking at having to rethink as human beings. We're having to rethink everything we've ever been told and taught about the history of the wars in the 20th century, and realize the same people have pulled the wool over our eyes in order to perpetuate this new world order, this one world order, which is nothing but a bunch of evil bankers and their politicians and their newspaper people and their spies who have been pushing and who have been organizing this system that we now know as the deep state, the new world order.
And what we see is the lamestream media is basically deer in the headlights. They are dying. They are grasping for breath. We can hear their lungs rattling from their incredible illness that's going to kill them because of the lies that are coming out of their mouths. And so what we're seeing here is not only the finding of the true roots of and the cause of these things, but we're also finding that we are seeing the death of it right in front of our eyes, because anybody who's awake is watching it. The wheels fall off the bus of the mainstream media, period. You cannot listen to the mainstream media unless you are complicit with ignorance, falsehood, lies, and basically a vicious left aggressive political attitude, which cannot be substantiated with anything except to say that you are psychotic. Look at Antifa attacking people coming out of Trump's rally in Minnesota last night. And the police couldn't handle it. And we know ahead of time, this is the second time this has happened in the same city. And we know that this was planned from the beginning, and the police actually backed off to let it happen. Why is that? Because they were told by the news that Antifa is not a domestic terrorist group, when in fact they are. And because Randolph Hearst can create yellow journalism war in a country where there's no war, or Cecil Rhodes can hide the war in South Africa and literally then later be given, a country named after him, Rhodesia. He basically was, the best fascist that could be produced at the time. And what did he do? He used the Venetian system. He had a round table, and he had the people around him, very small group, and then a bigger group around them who are oligarchs, usually bankers, and then around them a bigger group. Well, that's the way Britain works. So really, the Privy Council is the same thing. The monarchy is the one person. Life or death is in their hands at this point. Same thing with King George during the Revolution, the American Revolution. Life or death was in the hands of a monarch who was a fake monarch, who's not even British, who's not even Anglican, and is the king or queen of her own religion, for heaven's sakes. Just people should pause when they hear that, because that's stupid and insane. And anyone who could believe that the Windsors are any more divine than the common person on the street is just ignorant. So the British percolated Bolshevism, communism, Marxism, which then became Leninism, Trotskyism, Stalinism. And the fascism of Italy, of course, became Benito Mussolini. It became Franco in Spain. It became Hitler in Germany. And it became, unfortunately, people don't want to hear this, but it became the monarchy, and it became Winston Churchill and whoever was the prime minister at any time that the British were at war. Now, the British have been at war since the moment that they, stole gunpowder from the Chinese. They could shoot arrows. It doesn't matter. They have been in constant war with their own blood, with their own people, with France, with Germany, with Holland, with everyone. And yet their propaganda is so profound that everyone thinks that if you speak with a British accent, that you must be proper and you couldn't do anything wrong. Of course not. This is absurd. They have so propagandized us that we don't even know that Lockheed Martin, our number one military contractor, is ran by the Queen, or Five Eyes, four of them being the United Kingdom and one of them being us, work against us. And we've pointed this out again and again, but you have found the direct living connection. So when we want to say, okay, let's look at some British magazines or newspapers right now and media right now, we'd have to say Geoffrey Patty and Lord Mark Malloch Brown, two of the most powerful propagandists in the face of the earth.
Well, we can see now that the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Financial Times, the London Times, the Guardian are all still there. And these were the perpetrators of the stories that created the fantasy. I'm concluding that World War I was a fantasy, that the Bolshevik Revolution was a fantasy. I'm talking about false flags. I just can't believe this, but I have to. We're all false flags to help these people consolidate their world control. I mean, Douglas, I'm really having a hard time even saying this, but I can't deny the facts. And to realize that these same newspapers and then their TV and radio cousins are all the same people that are trying to take down our country right now, and thought they had it done with Hillary Clinton, and I think they're now pushing forward and even proposing that Hillary come back is just beyond the pale.
But that's indicative of the fact that they're so desperate that that's all they have left. Let's remember, these are the people. The mainstream media is nothing in America than an extension of the British media.
Yep.
The big bankers in America, which bought up the U.S. Federal Reserve, those are British bankers, or at least British money in most cases, except for Standard Oil. But to begin with, they also had British backing. So let's remember, Al-Qaeda was a myth. Al-Qaeda meant the list or the camp or the group that was being trained by the CIA in Afghanistan. So when we say Osama bin Laden, you say a CIA operative. And Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with 911. We know, just for a tiny example, of the people that they even accused of being the Al-Qaeda representatives, where did they come from? Saudi Arabia. And who signed their expedited visas that were created by James Baker, when James Baker literally had an extension of our State Department in the King Saud's palace? But who signed them? John Brennan.
Well, you know, Douglas, we're now reading in the newspapers of Britain in 1905 and 1906 that the Brits were giving British passports to Russians. And the only reason they came out in 1905, when they attempted their first false flag in Russia, is that one of those people that received these British passports blew himself up in Bristol in 1905, and they had to open an inquiry because they discovered the passports that were given to them. And the British knight who was in charge of that, handling that, was Edward Curzon, Sir Edward Curzon, who ended up later being on the British War Cabinet in 1916. And what I'm reading is the British equivalent in 1906 of Edward Mueller, or
Robert Mueller's special counsel.
Mueller.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way,
seeing the same pattern, and we're reading about this. These people aren't even creative.
No, they aren't. They percolated it in Britain with fascism. They incubated it with British and American money, and they sent these fascists to take over countries that they were afraid were going to stop British hegemony, which is they were scared to death that Germany and Russia would unite and that Britain would simply be obliterated. So what did they do? They invented the propaganda for World War I and II. But how is that any different than weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? So let me just remind us all. Where did the false flag information come from that yellow cake had been found on the way to Saddam Hussein? That was British intelligence. Now, who was it that helped us get Saddam Hussein out of jail in Egypt and sneak him into Iraq and give him his Air Force and his Navy and all the money, more money than anyone can count? His palaces, the walls were filled with American $100 bills, untold amounts. How did any of that happen? Because the newspapers created the false flag that there was going to be weapons of mass destruction. Never were. The intelligence community fell in line with that. So you can see the alignment of the White House, the intelligence community, the military is just simply they're told what to do, and they're given
Well,
false
Douglas,
information.
when you say the intelligence community, what we are discovering now, as we have talked about before, is that in 1909, the British intelligence community was created by their newspapers, not their newspapers. American and British newspapers in 1909 created intelligence. And so what we're now seeing is that continuous false stories pushed through the media by these spies, which are newspapermen, has really defined the culture of the 20th and early 21st century. It's disgusting.
It is, but it's okay because we're bringing it to
Why
light
is it okay?
because it's scum, and when scum has sunlight shine on it, it dies.
Okay, so we're shining light on these scum
Yeah.
that have killed over 200 million people. I mean, I just can't believe that, but it's true. And now they're trying to take down our president and our country for what?
For ISIS, for the president of Turkey, let me just frame this again. What we have right now is the result of what you have discovered when imperialism, and basically the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company and the Hanseatic League and others like it, corporations, got control of not only intelligence, which I've never saw anyone bring to light, the Imperial Press Union, or create the creation of the Empire Press Union, because that is the very golden moment of the birth of the demonic weaponization of all media, which then literally took over military intelligence and created the wars and fed to the military exactly what they needed. For instance, Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation, almost all the footnotes are to media agencies that are all crooked. So we can go down and say, oh, what happened in Iraq was completely a false flag, and we were never told the truth on either time. And remember, it was Daddy Bush who used a UN resolution to go to war with Saddam Hussein, who had been placed there by our own CIA. And remember, so Osama bin Laden is our friend, because remember that we had President Bush, Daddy Bush, Bush Sr., living with King Saud in his palace after he was the president. And he had all of his presidential daily updates coming there into a skiff. We had a skiff in the palace of King Saud, and that's the same palace that they say that the people who perpetrated 9/11 came out of, and yet we do nothing.
Well, let me
That's because
mention a skiff.
News media
I've
covers
actually helped a developer in Dayton build a skiff, so I know what they are. So when you say they had a skiff, most people don't even know what a skiff is, but it's supposed to be this type of technology that once you go in it, radio waves are not supposed to be able to penetrate through the skiff. And so therefore it's supposed to be, quote, secure. But when you tell me that the Saudi Arabians built a skiff so that supposedly George Bush could be secure, give me a break. All you got to do is run one wire through the skiff, and it's now not secure. So it's a joke.
Oh yeah, and but people don't remember, and I shall remind them right now, that the Bushes got their money from the Saud family, who gave them untold amounts of money for especially Baby Bush's oil attempts. And Daddy Bush's Zapata oil didn't even have oil. It was all fake. He was a CIA agent, and the offshore drilling platforms he had, those were CIA listening posts. Not only that, they were CIA headquarters. So he was, from the beginning, as an oil man, not an oil man. He was a CIA agent, and he actually used Saudi Arabian money in America again and again for both Daddy and Baby Bush's failed oil attempts. But do you see that in the news? No. So my point is, you can have fake weapons of mass destruction come from British fake intelligence that causes us to go into a fake war that is only approved by the United Nations and never once was approved by the US Congress. And that's our age now. You can have Obama bomb 7 countries, kill 2 million people, 58 million refugees were created by Obama's bombing. Unconstitutional? Yes. Was it supported by Congress? It was given money by Congress. Was it ever voted on? No. He also signed 5 treaties with the United Nations, none of which were valid. And then he tried to incorporate them in America, though in fact they were invalid and they were never supported by Congress. Why? The media says it's okay. The media says Obama was the coolest president of all because he did a lot of selfies and he'd get down on the floor and play with children in the Oval Office in his suit, and he'd hold children in his lap, and he would go and do, common things like, eat at Five Guys hamburgers. Disgusting. When will they look at the fact that he was part of the Chicago mob before they set him up to even run for his first political office? This man has a history that has been completely hidden. And as we pointed out just the other day, his own presidential library is still in boxes. No one can access anything to do with Obama because, as we told you, he picked a place to put it that it will take 20 years of legal filings before he can even get the land and do anything with it. And then you still won't get his library.
Well, Doug,
in other words, it's hidden.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's hidden. That's all I was going to say. It's
well,
hidden.
What's really clear now, and we now have the proof, is that these newsmen, these newspapers, these media people learned at least by 1900 and probably before that they could say whatever they wanted to say, whether it was true or not, on the pages of a newspaper, and get the great mass of society to believe whatever BS they wanted to say. And so what they started doing back at least by 1900, they started realizing that they could use this as a way to feather their own nest and feather their own agenda. And they've done it. I mean, when you read these stories that they wrote in the papers in 1902, 1903, I mean, they were great. They were total lies, had a lot of exquisite detail. So they would make up stories about spies running here, there, and everywhere, and just cover over their sins time and again. And they recognized that it was a profit center for them. And they started milking society with this profit center, which is the media.
Yes, and I get kind of bored with hegemony, the desire to take over the whole world because I want to. And by the way, I'm going to be in charge, and it's just going to be me. And I told the rest of you that, you get to participate, but you don't. And so that's what we see again and again. I mean, it is so boring. Look at President Erdogan. Look at Little Kim in North Korea. Look at the imams in every theocratic Muslim country. And then let's look at the news. The news covered it all up. Is John Kerry being prosecuted? Is Obama or Hillary for the $150 billion they gave the number one terrorist organization in the world? That would be Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But then Trump is wrong for putting sanctions on them? Oh, every single thing that they go after Trump for, unless it's his new invention, I would say, let's say 75% of them, well, for instance, I should qualify this, the ban on people coming from different countries. Well, it's perfectly legal. That's the president's job. It's actually in his job description. Obama did it, same 7 countries. Trump does it, it goes to the courts, and they set their hair on fire. Everything is like that. Why? Because the media is showing you what they can do to spin. But the great news is they just can't quite spin it anymore like they used to, because people are so numb by the lies that they've been told, that they don't believe anything. I forget the last statistic that I saw that was just really wonderful. Something like over 80% of the people do not trust any of the news. And
Well,
that's
they shouldn't. I mean,
even the left.
we have gotten the facts to show that we should not listen to anything that these people are saying and do anything but believe the opposite, the exact opposite of what they're actually saying. And if we did that, I think we'd be a lot better off. So just don't believe anything, folks. And in fact, turn it 180 degrees and listen to it with new ears. And if we do that, we'll probably get somewhere.
Absolutely. Another perfect example, especially since you brought up the wildebeest. And the wildebeest, we said, will run. But we said and predicted, but it was not really a prediction. I think it was a nickel bet, if I'm not mistaken. I think I put a nickel on the line that Hillary would be nominated as the Democratic National Committee presidential nominee from the floor. That way she wouldn't have a campaign. And I also predict she will never debate Donald Trump. She can't. She would be annihilated. But let's just look at that for a second. You have half of America believing that Hillary's a good person. And it took a Donald Trump to say, excuse me, we were giving almost $1 trillion when it comes down to it, or more, and probably tens of trillions of dollars in IP and in trade secrets that were being stolen and technology that was being stolen by China, all to China. So what? So Hillary could get money from the Walmart board, from the, that's Sam Walton's family, one of the largest corporations in the world. And then she did the same thing practically the same thing in Russia. She was trying. Uranium One was the same thing. It was just getting the Russians to come in America. She sold out our uranium. She got paid off. Same thing with China. She sold out all of our manufacturing to China and she got directly paid off. And she can't be satiated when you're that evil. Gluttony and greed and lust and envy and jealousy is so profound that demons possess you. She is definitely possessed by the demons of the 7 deadly sins. You can just look at her and see that. We now know that she made $20 billion from all of her foundations. Not 2 billion, folks. 20 billion, and still she needs more. She needs to write another book. She needs to charge large amounts of money to hear her speak. This woman is a psychopath. She's not in contact with reality, but unfortunately, she has control over reality that is demonic and extraordinarily clever. And she has control over the mainstream media because they believe, they all donated to her, remember, but they believe that it's just right that she become the Queen of America and she can do whatever she wants. That's the plan because she's a globalist. So she's the ultimate psychopathic, basically nouveau queen of America. She wants to be just like the queen with her privy council. And she doesn't want anybody to be able to question her. And she did a beautiful job. How is she not in jail? Mainstream media. And what is the mainstream media? It is the tool of the banks. And the politicians are nothing more than an extension of that. Because all the politicians that are there for any period of time are getting their piece of the pie. That's the reason they're there. So what we see is the beautiful job that was being done up until the time of Trump. And now that we're in the Trump era, we're in the post-falsehood politics era, we're in the post-lying era, we can actually now look at this evil and simply laugh at it. Turn it off. Don't buy it. Don't vote with your wallet. Vote at the polls. And make sure that you demand your rights. Because if you don't stand up, and I think if we had videos of us, we'd see that a few of us are wearing the Betsy Ross, stand up shirt. Because why? We have to simply stand up. That's all we have to do. We don't have to even fight. We have to just stand up for right, stand up for the rule of law. And we are seeing the crumbling of a over 100-year-long. It's not a conspiracy, folks. It is the Pilgrim Society. It is a secret society where if you get invited to dinner to the Pilgrim Society, you're going to be told what to invest in.
Yes.
It's an insider trading group. And it's also where you get your orders from. And once they know that you're a good, true member, you might get into the Knights of Malta. You might get knighted by the Queen. Certainly you're going to become a British citizen as well as an American citizen, which should be illegal, by the way. And
well, you know, Douglas, I think that the beauty of what we've discovered is the deep state has a name. And we used to think it was the senior executive service. And that's certainly a component of it. But the deep state has a name globally, and it's called the Pilgrims Society. And it's not the Plymouth Pilgrims. This is, it's really kind of appropriate that they chose the name Pilgrims in their name. But the ultimate evil that's running our country and running our world is called the Pilgrim Society. So since we have a name for it now, hopefully all of the truth tellers around the world are going to start digging into this and really tear it apart. That's really what needs to happen.
yes, the Pilgrims are the pirates of the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, the Hanseatic League, and all of the other corporate traders who traded with a sword and who fleeced other countries and killed more people than anybody knows because they covered it up. Because in those early days of the 1600s, the news only traveled by ship or by travelers or by pigeon. So they covered their bases very beautifully. And what happened? The British East India Company became larger with its fleet and with its army than the British or anybody else. They became the rulers of the sea, and they used the rule of the merchant legal system so that they could basically say anywhere where water goes, the British kingdom has the right to go. And basically, they say trade, but it's really fleece. And then they killed people. And remember that they brought illnesses to these people. And then what happens? Then you show how the pharmaceutical company, Burroughs Wellcome, was directly connected with the founding of the intelligence system through the media, which then controlled the military. And this is pre-imperialism. These are the people who showed us how to be imperialistic fascists. And what did they know? They knew one thing, that the illnesses of the people in the faraway countries they went to could kill them. And they knew that they brought encephalitis, flu, and all these other things to them. And they killed more people than anybody knows. All for the sake, I mean, just look at the conquistadors. We you know, if you want to focus a little bit for a moment on the same type of fascism, the conquistadors in America did more damage than anybody knows, and they got more gold. You know that there are 70 ships filled with gold at the bottom of the ocean that sank in storms going back to Spain from the Americas? That's what went down. Basically, the gold that was fleeced from the Americas became the economy, the gold of the economy of Europe. And it was the only reason that gold coins even continued to be used, because of these resources. But what did they always believe? We're white people, and you, not white people, need to thank us for coming in and taking your resources because you don't know what to do with them. That is literally what they said.
That's in their books. That is absolutely right, in their books. That's what they talk about. And they talk about their privilege as sort of some kind of right, but I wouldn't call it a divine right, although that's what they called it. But it is a demonic right that believes that they have some sort of privilege to rule over others. And we can see that. And you're right. That's what we see in a Hillary Clinton. We see that assumption of some sort of privilege that must rule. And that's really what's coming out of this research. And it stole my technology. It stole the technology of many inventors, and has stolen the property of untold millions of people, has stolen people's lives. It steals, it kills, it destroys. And I think that's really the evil that we really have to start attacking now.
Absolutely. And let's just take a couple more examples. China, North Korea. The mess in North Korea. We gave North Korea all the money to build everything atomic and nuclear in their country. $4.5 billion through 3 different administrations. And then they want to say that Trump is doing something wrong. And then they watched North Korea over and over again build breeder reactors so that they could create nuclear weapons. And why? Because we basically cut them off. We put them into isolation. And what was that about? So that China could get the rare earth minerals from North Korea secretly, and no one wants to talk about it. And at the same time, we're acting like China's our friend and North Korea's our enemy. No, China's our enemy. And that just shows you that anybody that in the news that doesn't say that, they're simply completely brainwashed. China had entered into our military systems, all of them, all of our financial systems, now Hollywood, real estate, stock market, you name it. China has infiltrated 100%. And they know that also Russia did the same thing. Russia brags that when they kicked out the 10 Russian spies over the Uranium One deal, they said that one of them was directly sitting next to Hillary Clinton. In other words, the Russians didn't need to have CC sent to them from all of Hillary's emails. They had a spy controlling her. And of course, we know who that spy is. Alexandra Chalupa, who is the person who produced the false material on Paul Manafort, who produced the false material on Trump, who created the lie of the false call from Estonia that went to Ukraine that had compromising material on Trump that went to Victoria Nuland, all created by a member of the Democratic National Committee who is a Russian and who is a Russian spy. And that is the reason she called in another Russian spy, Dmitry Alperovich from CrowdStrike, to be the only person to look at that server. And here we are, 3 years later, still hearing nonsense and fighting the color revolution, the coup against Donald Trump because of a Russian spy that won't even be acknowledged. And yet they're saying Trump was connected to the Russians. No, Hillary could not have been.
Douglas, we already talked about this. Whatever they're saying, think the opposite. We've got to start doing that. We really have got to stop talking about that and start doing that. Whatever they say, think the opposite.
Yes. And
because that will be the truth.
Betsy and I Tyler and I got involved in this because one day she turned and she said, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, it's got to be legal. And we both said, well, that's insane. It can't be legal. And I said, no, that's the only way. So we look it up and it's illegal. So anytime you think something horrible is going on, look it up. It's probably legal. Like anyone in the Congress can lie.
Yeah.
They cannot be held for perjury.
Yeah, it's called the False Statements Accountability Act, subsection B.
So Adam
It's
Schiff,
okay to lie.
thus Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi and Nadler and all of them, Schumer, they could all lie all day long and not be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of system is that? Now, look closely. You will find that there are probably laws being created right now that are backing up the coup of Trump. For instance, the changing of the whistleblower law.
Right.
That you can have secondhand information. That was done and post-dated so that it would cover this stupid conversation, which is all a lie. And Trump, of course, diffused it by sending out the truth, the real what happened in the conversation. And now we find out what? The whistleblower works for Biden, and Biden himself, Joe Biden, works for Rosemont Seneca that got $900,000 for lobbying for the Ukraine in just 1 year. So now we're uncovering that Joe Biden literally was a lobbyist for the Ukrainians, who are basically the region, that the Party of Regions is a fascist group. And he basically was lobbying for them. And he wants to say he didn't know anything about his son making millions of dollars from Burisma, though he was lobbying for Burisma, the oil company. And then what did China say? They're not going to look into the Bidens. Why? Because that's the only deal that ever really went down, was the $1.5 billion for a nonsense deal. And remember, this is John Kerry's stepson, Christopher Hines, who's involved in this also. So we're talking about John Kerry and Biden getting millions of dollars by using their children and placing them and making promises to give USAID or USAID to foreign countries and for what we now know are billions of dollars in OPEC deals, which are loans given out that are backed by the U.S. government, which people usually default on. So
Well,
we
Doug,
now know this is what was going on.
somebody asked me the other day, why do we keep focusing on 1905? Why do I keep focusing on 1905 and 1906? And I said, well, you know, I'm an engineer, and one of the things that I learned being an engineer is that you can't just put band-aids on problems. If you've got a crack in a wall, you got to figure out why that's occurring. And otherwise, you're just going to put a band-aid on the side of the building, and it's going to crack again. And that's why we've had to start marching backwards in time to realize when this started. And the modern version of this really does seem to have started at the formation in 1902 of the Pilgrim Society in both the United States and in UK in 1902 and in 1903 in the US. And we now know who started it, Sir Harry Britton and Lord General Roberts, who actually was the founder of modern concentration camps. And you started talking about the children, and that's the other thing that we have seen is we're not dealing with those people anymore. We're dealing with their grandchildren, grandchildren of these same people. And that's now what we're seeing now is they're passing it on to their children. It's the same pattern, and it's been going on now for about 120 years.
And it's grotesque. Why would I want Dick Cheney's relative in anything? That man is pure evil. Why would we want McCain, who's also pure evil and basically responsible for the deaths of many of our soldiers? Why would we want his relatives? We don't want them. We don't want Mitt Romney's. We don't want anybody that is a child. There should be a law that says that this stuff is not handed on to their children, because that's where the fantastic corruption comes from. And we see this now in modern time, but this goes back to, as you said, the turn of the 20th century. So this hasn't changed. It's the same old thing. And what is beautiful about this is that when you find out that it's a small group of people, a few thousand people, are the globalists controlling our lives. And it comes down to literally, a few dozen companies, corporations, that if we simply ended them and not let them shift over to some, shill company, but ended them for good, we would stop most of the very things that we found the roots of, which are the roots of fake news, the roots of evil Italian banking in Britain, the incubation of false isms from psychopaths that are funded by Britain. We can basically say to all of these things that were created at that time, we know who you are. And when you call the devil out, it is at that moment that the devil runs and hides, because the devil doesn't want anybody to know the work that they're doing. And that's what you have actually put your finger on. You've put your finger on the pulse of people who have murdered more people in our modern times than you can count. And it comes back to the same exact group of people promoting world hegemony based upon white supremacy. And it is absolutely disturbing, but it still goes on to this day, and we can stop it.
Yes.
Stop Five Eyes, get all British companies out of America, disassociate with our enemies who are actually doing us in, and reinstate the Constitution and get rid of, by law, by action of Congress, the Senior Executive Service Group, which is basically the shadow government, and make sure that anyone involved in internationalism becomes an enemy of America, a sworn and known enemy of America, like George Soros. If you're into internationalism, you're into ripping off America. It's as simple as that.
It is. Well, one of the other things we need to do is get the British out of our U.S. Patent Office. I mean, that's just scandal, right there.
That is trillions and trillions of dollars worth of theft. Well, Betsy, I think that we need to go contemplate this some more, because what Michael and his researchers have brought up kind of makes me ashamed that I didn't know this and that I wasn't harping on this many, many years ago when I was a professor. So thank you, Michael, and thank you, researchers, all of you. I know that you're shy. I know a lot of you, and I know you're shy, and I know you won't speak. So thank you, Michael, for being the voice of these researchers and the voice for the writers at Americans for Innovation. And thank you, Betsy Tyler, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do any of this stuff.
Okay, let's wrap it up. Everybody out there, y'all have a great day. And remember, we need all information warriors to report for duty. We've given you your instructions in the CAT report, and we are hoping and expecting all patriots around the world to join forces to end the evil that we see on this planet.